tonight. This is our the Hot Springs County Republican Party Speaker Series. It is a nonpartisan event. It's open to the public, and I just want to thank you all for being here. And let's see. Do I have to? Oh, here's my notes. No, I had some things I had to say. Oh, okay. We do have a donations jar back there, and one of our treasurer is an accountant, and she's always saying, be sure you mention donations. So I'm mentioning the donations. Again, if people come in, remember this, if we've had a couple incidents, remember this is nonpartisan, and it is open to the public, and try to maybe keep our remarks respectful, and find the common dialogues between us, even if it's a hard topic. Also, do you want me to introduce you? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, I can do it.
All right.
You're okay.
Brent ran for governor, got more votes than any of the 2018 people did. So
Okay.
there we go.
Thanks, you guys. Can you hear me in the back okay? Good?
Or do you want my
Are you good? Are we good? Okay. If I start losing it, Connie, then I'll grab it.
And unplug it. There we go.
Okay, thanks. All right, folks, it really is a privilege for me to come down here. I love going through Thermopolis. I mean, when I was campaigning, of course, Thermopolis is almost the crossroads, right, of Wyoming, especially from Sheridan. You got to, anywhere in the southwestern part of the state, you got to come through, and and so on. So it's such a beautiful place, and I've always said that anywhere in Wyoming is better than anywhere else. Period. I just love this state, and I do. So several weeks ago, Cheryl had asked, we were talking, and she brought up the term, I guess, the subject of globalism. So I said, okay, we could probably talk about that. I will tell you that of all the candidates that were running for statewide office, I was the only one talking about globalism and its effects. And I will tell you that I didn't receive a whole lot of questions as we were going through. Of all the stops we made and all the folks with whom, had the opportunity to speak and trade, exchange, whatever ideas, got very little input on this. And so it made me a little concerned, right? And I know in Wyoming, because it's so awesome here, right? We kind of live in this bubble, and we do. Okay, we have a very conservative electorate, okay, and again, I'm trying to stay bipartisan here, but I think we've seen the results of a not so conservative legislature, right? And state government. So there is kind of a dichotomy there of what's going on. But when I think of the term globalism, it's huge. Okay, it's massive. And it's very hard to distill this down into something that, particularly for those who never really pay much attention to it, to kind of understand. But bottom line is everybody in here is affected by it. Everybody is. Okay, the policies that are generated internationally, nationally, globally, whatever you want to call it, trickle down nationally, and then ultimately come down to us here, okay, in the state. All right. So, and this is not a pretty slide deck by any means. All right, the content's there, but So initially, I had this kind of generated as a speech, and I thought, I kind of would rather just present, so I started transposing this the other day up here. So a few things we'll talk about, what it is, the general history, some of the key players, okay, internationally, how it affects us, and what we should do, okay, if anything. All right. Okay, real quick, I want to do a pulse check here on folks. I'm just going to, okay, who or what defines morality? God. Okay, anybody else? Okay, no, you don't have to speak, you don't have to say anything, but okay. All right, again, I'm just trying to get a pulse check here. Okay, who in here believes in American exceptionalism? Exceptionalism.
What's that?
American exceptionalism?
Yeah.
That we as Americans are exceptional by the fact that we're less than part of 5% of the world's population that has the freedom bestowed upon us that we do. And that we are great because of that.
Let's say farmers don't know those big words.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry. No, don't worry. I don't know too many of them. Okay. All right. Okay, so good to go. So I think we're. Hey there, John. All right.
saved you a spot.
Okay, so what is it? What is it? So I pulled a few definitions, okay, off the net, all right, and off of kind of some common, what we're familiar with, Webster's, Cambridge, and Dictionary.com, which I use all the time because it's easy, right? But I always cross-check with some of these others. But I highlighted some of the, kind of the key words out of these. Okay, number one, a national policy. Okay, out of Webster's. An idea, right? Out of Cambridge. An attitude or policy. So what we're getting is more of an ideology. Okay, an ideology, a group think type of what's going on here. Okay, based on certain criteria. Very much a collectivism, which we know, unless you're a helicopter aviator, like I happen to be, which is a collective right here that gets your power. I don't like the word collective. Okay, I just don't like it. Okay, so, but ultimately, okay, the end state here is to establish a one world government. Okay, that's what the end state is. Okay, and they're very clear about this. Okay, so, all right, some general history. Okay, and I'm not an economist, I'm not a historian, and nor am I a political scientist. Okay, what I'm looking at this from growing up with a set of parents that were so up to speed on current events, it was crazy. Okay, and spending majority of my adult life, about 28 and a half years in the Marine Corps, and seeing the way the world really is. Okay, not through the eyes of a tourist, but through the way it really is. Okay. And so you quickly realize just how great we have it here in America. But anyway, so there were attempts, okay, both by the Greeks and by the Romans way, way, way back when. What was global then is actually regional now, and that just has to do with transportation and those kind of things. Lines of communication, supply routes, etc. The catalyst, though, for the modern globalization can kind of be broken down into these four things here. Okay, we've got the first industrial revolution, okay, which really started in Great Britain, okay, back in the 1700s and went all the way through almost to our Civil War, okay, 1830s. So what we saw here is just centered on iron, coal, textiles, those kind of things. They designed machinery because now they had something to power this stuff. So how do we harness this? So it really opened up the door to a lot of things. Now, again, that's a few generations in there, okay, and if you guys know of a different date, don't hesitate to correct it, okay? This is the best research I was able to do. Okay, so then that kind of transitioned into what I called the rise of the American middle class. Because the American middle class, without a doubt, is the engine of this nation. Okay, it is. And as we go through this tonight, we'll hear some certain terms, but in the end, regardless of whether it's climate change, COVID, systemic racism, gender dysphoria, whatever it is, it's all about class warfare. That's what it is. Okay, it's economic warfare, and that's why once we get to the World Economic Forum, it'll make a little bit more sense maybe. So here we saw electricity, we saw communication, we saw mass production, transportation. She did make it. Looks, that's my wife Susan back there. She didn't have to go. We saw labor regulations, right? So we can't forget how important, and I know the railroad comes through here, but how big of a deal the railroad was, okay, back then. So as we're going through the Civil War, okay, we have the leader of the opposition, or of the South, I guess. We have the two leaders, right? One can't see beyond the Mississippi, the other one's looking beyond the Pacific. Okay, so when you look at the two railroad acts of 1862 and 1864, it's like, holy smokes, we're going. Somehow we got to connect these coasts, all part of the manifest destiny, right? That it was inevitable that America was going to expand west. Okay, that's kind of what it was all about. So, a lot of folks forget this, and I tell you I do too, is that we have time zones because of the Union Pacific.
Right.
Okay, time zones internationally. Okay, and that was to make sure things were on schedule. And ultimately, that went around the world. Okay, then 1969 to present, and there's some overlap here. Okay, and it's not like one just stopped and then we didn't do anything and then the other one picked up. I mean, we had these advances, right? But this is predominantly when this happened. Okay, during these time periods. We had the electronics / the digital age, the microchip, right? Computers. Those things start coming up. The instigator for that was really World War II. I mean, the technology we got out of World War II, and typically anytime we go into a conflict, we just get a whole bunch of new ideas, technology, and everything else, and we expand on that. And that's the beauty of America, right? Assuming we stay with the meritocracy. And of course, the internet, World Wide Web. All right. So this is still kind of going on. You know, some folks will tell you that we're really in between 2005 2010, it kind of, waned. But then there's no clear area where the fourth industrial revolution begins. We just know we're in it right now. Okay, and this is a realm it's unbelievable. Okay, and I don't even understand it. But we're talking about artificial intelligence, right? This exponential cyber advancements, nanotechnology. So that's 1,000 times smaller than microtechnology. I mean, shoot, you can't even see it, right? I mean, it's amazing. Biotech, energy storage, quantum computing, some scary stuff depending upon how you look at this. Okay, very scary stuff, right? But that's what we're in right now. All right. And I will tell you, nothing transformed the world like the birth of America. Nothing did. We often hear of the 5,000-year leap. America was the 5,000-year leap, right? Has anybody heard that term? Okay. And I can't remember who coined it. So.
Leon Skousen.
Okay.
Ooh.
Okay.
Skousen.
All right. I wish I did, but I didn't. But anyway.
He wrote a book.
Yes, that's right. He did. He did.
He wrote 5 books on.
But if you think about it, in less than 200 years, we went from the horse-drawn carriage to the moon. We went from the feather pen to the internet. We did all that stuff here. We did it all here in America. Okay, we led. Freedom led to self-determination, led to ingenuity and invention, and we can see that capitalism, based on free market economics and meritocracy, is the key to it all. Okay, it really is. Some folks have come up and said, well, the Chinese, when they came over and built for the Central Pacific, as we were coming across from Sacramento to Promontory Point, Utah, right, where the two lines met for the transcontinental, that was slave labor. It wasn't slave labor. We just didn't have any regulatory or any labor regulations in at the time. That really kind of came in with Teddy Roosevelt, right, at the end of the 1800s. Right, so it wasn't. Now, I believe that the American experiment ended in 1865. And when I say that, remember back, Thomas Jefferson, okay, he was president in 1801, I think 1809 or something like that. He knew slavery was wrong. Okay, but we just came out of a war, right? A war of independence. And he feared that, hey, if we start doing this, we may get in another internal war. Right? So he stopped the slave trade, right? So whatever was here was here. But he knew it was wrong. But we know that with the 13th Amendment that abolished it, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, we were no longer an experiment. America is. Okay, that's just the way it is. Okay, we rid the world of something they couldn't do. We did it. We took the lead on it. And of course this led, and we had to do that. Okay, Lincoln had to reunite, even though of course he was assassinated here. But what led to the second was this Reconstruction effort. This mass, just this plowing forward. I mean, the two best land acquisitions that we did, Louisiana Purchase and Alaska, right? I mean, hands down. I mean, I'd love to find a real estate deal like that now. So we became a world leader, really, at the end of the 19th century, mid-1890s. Our economy was really starting to go. Okay, we had Teddy Roosevelt out there with this Great White Fleet. Okay, has anybody heard that term? Okay, so the Great White Fleet was the United States Navy. Okay, and he sailed that all over the world to project power. And we got to remember that Great Britain at the time had the leading navy, just like they did back during the Revolution. Okay. And really, by the end of World War I, we became a superpower. By the end of World War II, we became the superpower. Okay. And of course, we invented the term globalism. Right? We did. Okay, and a lot of this was all done with the best intentions, primarily with the Marshall Plan. Remember the Reconstruction after World War II? So as we sat down with the Allies post World War II, and the issue there was, okay, we got to make sure we don't go into another world war again. Right? So they did all these economic boundaries, all these political boundaries, and national boundaries, and everything else. Okay, all with the intent of preventing another world war. All right. So let me ask you guys this: when does globalism become a threat? And we haven't quite gotten into, well, we've kind of gotten into what it is, but we haven't gotten into the mechanics of it yet. When does anybody think globalism becomes a threat to America? To America.
When it does away with our sovereignty.
That's it. So and again, I agree with this answer because this is what I believe.
What was his answer?
Okay. Remember, anything in moderation, right? When globalism threatens our national sovereignty, it becomes a threat. Okay, and that was one of the biggest things I had rolling out on the campaign, is that we cannot ever cede our national sovereignty because we are the leader. We are the leader of the free world. Okay, and we can never let that go. Okay. Yeah.
I didn't hear was the when.
I'm sorry?
What was the year?
When did
Well, we haven't necessarily.
You asked the question, when did it become a global threat? Somebody answered, I didn't hear it.
What did
Oh,
Paul
and
say?
it was when we, not necessarily a time, I'm sorry, maybe the question's not phrased, but it's when we cede our national sovereignty to it. So when the global, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on here, when they start making rules for us directly that usurps our Constitution, then that's where it
We
becomes
don't
a
have
problem.
that. Not with COVID or anything.
Now with what? Yeah. Yeah. I know it. Okay, so a president could go out there and make treaties, right? But who ratifies them? That's right. The Senate does. So, with a 2/3 majority, is we got to make sure that, that's why it's so important. Every state has 2 of these guys, right? We've got 2. That we look to put those with American interests as our top priority. Okay, we got to make sure we do that because this stuff's going on, and there's so many things going on behind the scenes I don't even know about. Okay, and it's kind of frightening to see it all. All right. So key players in the global hierarchy, architecture, whatever you want to call it. Now I'm only going to discuss a few of them. Okay, there's a bunch of them, but I'm going to look at the primary ones. Okay, is everybody familiar with the United Nations? Okay, it replaced the League of Nations. The League of Nations was actually created by Woodrow Wilson after World War I. Okay, Woodrow Wilson was very much a globalist type of president. Okay, so was TR, but in a completely different way. Okay, so it's the largest one, 193 nation members. They've got a lot of subgroups in there. We're not going to go into any of them because it's kind of complicated and everything else. But you can see in the General Assembly, Security Council. Okay, remember, there's 5 voting members on the Security Council. We're one of them. Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, UN Secretariat, and the Trusteeship Council, which hasn't been operating for quite a while. All right, now, as I go through these agencies or whatever you want to call them, there's one common thread that I was able to find, or one common stance, if you will. Okay, and that was every single one of them looked at climate change the same way. They just phrased it a little bit different. Okay, the same way. And when I say climate change, because we know we have 4 seasons, we know that the climate today is a little bit different than it was yesterday. Okay, but we're talking about man-made climate change. Okay. Okay, and is everybody familiar with the Paris Climate Agreement that happened back in 2015? Okay, this is where kind of they agreed that they were by mid-century, 2050, we were going to cap the world's temperature by no more than 2 degrees centigrade. And then just recently they decided, no, we're going to make that 1.5 degrees. Okay, and I look at this, how presumptuous can you possibly be to think you can actually control the weather around the world? Okay,
It's cow flatulence.
Yes. But anyway, that's kind of part of it, okay, as we go through this. All right. Everybody heard of the WHO?
Yes.
World Health. Okay, now I've had the opportunity to work with these guys, if you call it that. We had the largest cyclone, okay, and that's hurricane or cyclone, whatever, to hit U.S. soil actually happened back in 2018. And it went right over the top of the island of Tinian. Okay, this is over in the Marianas. Okay, 15 islands. Okay, you got Guam, which is a different government than the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. And sustained winds at 212 miles an hour, if you can imagine it. Okay, one person died. And all southern Saipan and Tinian looked like it probably did during World War II. It was brown, and these islands were, they're subtropical, right? I mean, they're beautiful, beautiful, but they were brown. I mean, everything was just flattened. All right. So I had the WHO came out, and a bunch of other FEMA naturally, and everything else, and so I was in charge of reconstruction of Tinian, and a buddy of mine was and another guy were working the reconstruction of Saipan. But anyway, so I was kind of working with these guys, and it's interesting because it's the WHO representatives with which I was working were very disconnected. Okay, they were disconnected from the emotion of American citizens that just lost everything. I mean, that 210 miles an hour, and that's sustained winds. That's going to flatten anything, even the concrete homes that they live in. But it was kind of interesting. Everything was very methodical. There was no. It was just. I noticed it right away. It was kind of interesting, right? The way it all worked out. Oddly enough, okay, because we've seen the alliance, right? Alliance may not be the right word, between China and the WHO recently, right? Well, historically, it was China, the Norwegians, and the Brazilians that actually came up with the WHO way, way, way back when. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Back in 1948, actually in 1945, they came up with the idea. So of course they want to lead. They do believe in universal health care coverage. And of course everything costs money. Everything costs money, and that's really what it's about. Climate change, the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. Okay, that's the WHO stance on it. World Bank. I'm sure you guys have probably heard about the World Bank. Okay, and again, this is post-World War II. Okay, the intent of the World Bank was to be able to offer loans to those nations, okay, that weren't wealthy like the American, like America, and to help them reconstruct. Okay, and post-World War II with all the damage, because I mean we know that the damage after World War II was just massive. So if you kind of look what's going on here, so they got roughly about a $23.5 billion in contributions from the nations, from other nations. Okay, we got 186 countries, and climate change, poverty, and inequity are the defining issues of our age. Okay, that's the way they're looking at it. And this, they are the manager of the Clean Technology Fund. Okay, so if you're a nation, okay, let's take India. Okay, we'll talk about India here in a second. Okay, so India is really a third world nation. Okay, they've got the second largest population of any nation in the world next to China. Okay, but they're going to pass China pretty soon because China has the one-child policy, right? That's why China's rise, as fast as it is, may be short-lived simply because they're not going to have the population. Okay? But then how much time do you really need to put everything in place? So, all these variables kind of working together. But so if you look at India, India's trying to advance to a second world country. So what does that really mean? That means going from 1 meal a day to 2 meals a day, in basic speak. That's kind of what it means. Well, you're not going to get that off of windmills and solar panels. Okay, you're going to get that out of coal, out of fossil fuels. Okay, I also call those renewables because they are renewables. It just takes a little bit longer to renew those, right? Than it does the other stuff. But that's kind of the key. I mean, no matter how you look at it, and so, as China's sitting here building a new power plant once a month, coal-fired power plant once a month, somewhere in there, a month every 6 weeks, and we haven't built one in decades, right? Particularly in Wyoming. These nations that are producing far more emissions than America are getting a pass, and you got to wonder, why are they getting a pass on this? And of course, you obviously care about the people. But it's like, okay, the rules should be the same for everybody, depending upon what's going on here. Okay, so that's the World Bank. World Trade Organization. Have you heard of this one? Okay. So this is another key player here. This is actually that terminology was out in 1995, but it was actually it replaced something else that was not that effective, and I can't remember it for the life of me right now. But the concept has been around for a long time. Okay, since the 50s. Okay, but the whole purpose of this is to make sure that trade between nations, across the seas, across whatever else, flows freely as we can or as smoothly as possible, that it's fair and those kind of things. All right, 164 member states. Now, thinking about all the countries in the world, that's still a lot, right? Okay, you can see their stance on climate change. And again, you can go through their website, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on all these websites and all these papers. But the common thread there is the commonality among how all these global organizations look at climate change. Okay? And that's why I wanted to bring that out. All right. And again, strong relations with the UN there. Okay, what about the G20? Familiar with this? Okay, so these are the heads, 19 richest nations in the world plus the EU, European Union. Okay, so it's a non-permanent. That's why I don't really have a location for them. These guys kind of meet everywhere else. But so if you can just think of the 19 richest nations in the world plus the EU, obviously the United States falls into this, right? So does China, so does Japan, Korea, South Korea, etc. But they are very much pledged or focused on climate change, and they've donated $100 billion, or at least
Is that the one
pledged.
Trump dropped out of?
Yes,
Yeah. That and
Because-
the Paris one.
because of the Paris Climate Accords, etc.
Because they expected us to do all the emission
Right.
and not the other countries. So these
That's right.
19 countries means actually us giving it up
That's right.
and
That's
taking it in the.
That's right. So and I don't have the numbers up here, we're the lead contributor to this. China is the second to this when it comes down to the actual money put forward, which makes sense because they're the two largest economies. Okay. This is a whole different ballgame. Okay, the World Economic Forum. Okay, this is when you start reading about this is what raises the doggone hairs on my back. Okay, it does, and I don't have a hairy back, but it's just kind of one of those things. So, have we all heard about when these guys meet at Davos once a year? Okay. So a lot of us think, oh, this is a bunch of rich dudes flying their private jets to Switzerland and hanging out, partying, doing whatever. Well, that's not really what's going on. Okay. This is a combination of the wealthiest people in the world. Okay. A combination of the largest corporations in the world. Communications, social media, banks, the biggest banks in the world, all are coming together. So when you look at this, if you follow the money, this one has a bottomless bottomless pot for money here. That's why it's such a big deal. None of these guys are elected.
No.
None of them are. Okay? So what you're kind of seeing here, and as you see this play out, and we'll talk a little bit more about COVID and in my deduction with why, how that played out. Really what this is world governance under the authority of large corporations, billionaires, big banks, and World Economic Forum leadership. What does that sound like to anybody? We'll get to the term here.
Anti-constitutional.
Definitely anti-constitutional.
Communistic is what it is.
Yeah.
Close. What's the opposite of that?
Socialism.
Starts with an F. Fascism. That's really what it is.
Fascist, yeah.
That's really what it is. Now, since we're sitting here talking about different forms of tyranny, right? They all have one common denominator, right?
They're
That the
all-
individual must relinquish their personal freedom,
That's right.
right?
I think the
So
key
no
to
matter
what
how-
you're saying, for anybody who doesn't really believe
Okay.
that and isn't, I know people who go to Davos every year. I assure you, they absolutely think that the best thing for everybody is for them to be in charge. They set the rules. They don't necessarily apply to themselves, but they apply to all of us, and then we pay the price for it. And that's not
going on now.
my political belief. They say that you can go watch
That's
videos
ex-
and listen to
That's
them say it.
exactly right. Even on their website, they say the same thing. You're spot on. That's why it's such a big deal. And because, if you start looking at the composition of this thing, I mean, it's almost a bottomless pit of money. Yeah. Okay, the fourth industrial revolution, the Great Reset is, and we're kind of in that right now, where we think this is all really going to take shape and take form. Okay, so there's a guy, Richard Malone. I don't know if you guys have heard about this guy at all, but he's really come out with and it's actually a good piece. Yeah, there's obviously some opinions in it, but when you start reading through it, and then if you go through some of the point papers of the WEF, their website, it's like, okay, yeah, this guy's really outlined it. Now, naturally, it's a more conservative point of view. Okay, but if you read this, the next generation of technological advances where the differences between physical, digital, and biological technologies disappear. Okay, we don't even know what that is because nobody in here is familiar with that, right? But this is where the machines start, and this is not a Terminator deal. If you saw Elon Musk's interview here recently, he's been warning about this stuff. Okay, he has, and he started it.
Right.
He started it with the Google founder and some of these other guys. But this is where these, the technologies advance so much with nano and some of these, these supercomputer type things that they can almost evolve by themselves. All right. It's hard to believe, but anyway. Okay, so you have a small group of folks, like you were saying, small group of folks. So how do you get everybody else to believe this stuff? Repetitive narratives. Repetitive narratives over and over and over, and eventually, if you do it over enough generations, you get them believing it.
Or just limiting any other narrative.
And that's right. That's right. So here's one. Okay. I can't remember the date. But this is like 2009, 2010. Does anybody remember when Barack Obama came out and said that 97% of climatologists all agree? Does anybody remember that number? The key there is 97%. Well, that 97%, there's a guy, I think his name is John Cook, don't quote me on that, but he's a caricature artist over in England. He put all these reports together and said, oh, that looks like 97%. Okay. But until Barack Obama said that, right, nobody really believed it. Now all of a sudden he said it, leader of the free world, that's it. And as he said, debate's over. The debate's never over on this stuff. Because the one question that can't be answered is how much CO2 is actually allowed in our atmosphere for it to be bad. Nobody can answer that question, right? Nobody can answer. Okay, so where do we have to cap it? Okay, nobody can answer these questions. But as you look at this, the primary purpose of power and wealth consolidation. Okay, one thing that I mention on my campaign trail all the time: compliance, conformance, control. Okay, that's why we have to be up to speed on what's going on. But the intent here is to track all the people within the city, the crime, carbon credits, food, water, transportation. In fact, we were just talking about some food security here a little bit earlier tonight. That's a big deal. But it's really about wealth redistribution. Okay, this is class warfare. The one thing really standing in the way of globalism to really take effect is the United States middle class. Okay, that's just the way, that's just it. No matter how, and obviously I'm coming at this from a conservative point of view, but that is the reason we haven't yet. Okay? So when this is implemented, what freedom will we have? Okay, so, again, we just went over a few of them. Okay, total of 6. All right, so as you kind of watch COVID unfold, or as I did anyway, you got to kind of wonder, okay, what was, was this planned? Was it an accident? What really happened here? Okay, and I think there's, we're trying to get to the bottom of this, right? There was a lot of information out there that was just thrown out. And anybody who disagreed, as we know, right, who said, no, this had to be a lab leak, boom, right away, even if these guys were, 40-year MDs who've been, virologists that whole time. They were banished. They were slanted on everything. As soon as you went against the narrative, they were done. Now it's turning out that, in all likelihood, this was a lab leak. But what I thought was kind of interesting is, because it was global, that in the end, and we're still kind of messing with this because there's still a push to keep this COVID pandemic going. But I really saw that the hierarchy of the New World Order kind of aligned, okay, with this. Okay, and it took something that big to do it, okay, outside of a war. And so this is kind of what this is just me, all right? If you guys see something different, you let me know. And I don't know exactly what all the connections are when it comes down to, delegation and those kind of things, but I definitely see the World Economic Forum as being the nucleus of all this.
Being what?
The nucleus, sorry, the center. Okay, where all these others are kind of taking cues, revolving around this. And again, these are all unelected officials, okay, with this. Anybody dispute that? I mean, feel free. Okay. Okay, again, this is my 2 cents. Okay. All right. Okay, so part of the WEF, there's 100 strategic partners. Now, they break it down. And you can go up to their website and you can pull up this list. And I tell you, some of these will surprise you. Okay, but some of them are very, we would expect. BlackRock, Google. I put JP Morgan Chase up there because who is the custodian of our $26 billion mineral trust fund?
Let me think.
JP Morgan Chase.
Coca-Cola.
And yeah, we should have spoken before. Yeah, but this is just a handful. There's 100 of them on there. 100 of them. Okay. And I can tell you, in fact, I haven't talked to our treasurer about this. Is how do we get that $26 billion titled in Wyoming's name out of J.P. Morgan's name? And that's one of the first things I would do if I ever came for a day. One of the first things. ESG. Common?
Bad.
Environmental Social Governance Scoring System. Okay, you familiar with some of this? Okay, all right. All right, and it's not new. I mean, a lot of the terminology is just kind of coming out, but this has actually been around for a while. These equity scores, okay? We see Bud Light, right? We see some of these things happening with these, and if you start looking through the graduated scales on the number of points these big businesses get for doing certain things that are environmental compliance, social, and governance, okay, then you can see how, hey, these guys want to get up on this list, right? They want to get on this list, and they want to stay there. Well, you can't stay there unless you comply with a bunch of these things, right? Obviously, you got to make a bunch of money, too. All right, so that last one, we already kind of talked about this, but that's really what that is, okay? And it's not, corporate's not really the right word there, and I was trying to find, it's probably corporative monopoly. Okay, not necessarily corporate. But that's really what fascism is. Okay, that's really what it is. Okay. Now, I will tell you that the term has been very bastardized here over the last several years, right, with Antifa. Anti-fascist, right?
Yes.
I mean, it has. So,
fascist here.
yeah, exactly. And but that's typically the way that side works. All right, another key player. You got to bring China into the equation. You got to bring China in. But here's what's kind of interesting here is if you look through history, we've had a lot of involvement with China over the last couple hundred years, close to it, right? I mean, what in the world were Americans doing over in China back in the 1850s? Well, okay, so the Second Opium War. Then we had the Boxer Rebellion. Okay, remember China's flag changed a lot. There were, and I'm not a Chinese historian by any means. Okay, and then we saw, now this is war with, directly or by proxy. Most of it was by proxy, right? The Korean War. Okay, that was a proxy war, even though the Chinese were just kind of, but we were directly involved with them, particularly at the Chosin Reservoir up there. The Vietnam War. Okay, a lot of these things were going on. Laotian Civil War, the Cambodian Civil War. Okay, China was backing, the opposition, and of course we were backing, the democracy, capitalism type of thing. Now, I will tell you that, and I believe these are the right years. Okay, I went to the U.S. Naval War College about 10 years ago, doing some research on China, but there's no known photographs, at least that's what they were preaching back then, to come out of China between 1952 and 1953. And you gotta wonder why. Well, that's because doggone Mao Zedong was laying waste, right? I mean, everything was shut down. Okay, that's when, you know, he was rolling in there. So it's kind of interesting that during that year, it's probably about an 18-month period, there's no known photographs that come out of China. Anyway, that's just, okay, so we've kind of looked at China playing both sides of the fence, right? We have. So Nixon goes over there in the early 70s, sits down with Mao Zedong, says, okay, you know, somehow we got to get you guys recognized here, you know, or whatever it is. So we come out with the One China policy, which was actually, it's not, it wasn't a law, it wasn't a treaty, it wasn't anything like that. It was more of a transmission, okay, that was interpreted as a One China policy. So what that means is that before this happened, a lot of the Chinese political hierarchy went over to Taiwan, which used to be Formosa probably prior to World War II, which back in the 1800s we were actually over in Formosa. So you know we've had play in that part of the world for quite a while. But so what we reckon, the One China policy means that whether it's Taiwan or whether it's China, we recognize this as under one government, One China policy. But then on the other side, we recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. So, you know, I mean, what kind of mixed signals are you doing, right? Okay. So through the 80s, through the 90s, we know that China was very much a proponent of communism, okay, and human rights violations. So there were these things that you know, our national policy was to try to get China in the game. Try to get China in the game. So it went until year 2000, okay, where that whole time Clinton was working to get China recognized by the World Bank, World Trade, Favored Nation status, NTR, normal trade operations, or relations rather. And so right prior to him turning over to W, they got the U.S.-China Relations Act of 2000 passed. Okay, so that put him in most favored nation status. Okay, so we were looking at the different industrial revolutions, right? And the time period there. Well, right back here at about 2000, our imports from China were about 1%. Right? In 20 years, I mean, there's several different numbers out there, okay, but I've seen a number as high as 47%. But I mean, imagine that. In one generation, okay, they went from basically a no-name economy to passing ours. You know, it's just amazing, right? But remember, China plays a long game, okay, and they also play behind the scenes. They've always done that all through their history. They always play behind the scenes, right? So we look at where China is. We know they're down in Panama, right? They basically own the canal. They're over in Africa. Okay, when I was over in Afghanistan, we were providing, now not me personally, providing security for the Chinese to come in and mine the $3 trillion of minerals they laid claim to in Afghanistan. What are we doing? You know, what the heck are we doing? So anyway, you kind of got to wonder what's going on. So anyway, it's kind of a crazy thing. So anyway, just this international recognition, and of course, because the United States is the leader, if we say most favored nation, the rest of the world just goes, okay, roger that. And that's what we've seen. But we talked about that it could very well be short-lived. But who knows? You know, they have the longest life expectancy, far longer than America. Okay, but that's not because their birth rate. It's because the people are living longer over there, okay, than they have been in the past. Okay, but again, one child. Okay, you need 2.1 children to sustain a nation. Okay, well, even here in America, we've fallen below that, right? And a lot of it is because of a lot of the stuff that's been preached, you know, generationally in our schools about how bad America is when you know, that's a different topic. So I see China as their primary role is to undermine Americanism.
Yes.
Okay, they want to be the premier superpower in the world. They just do. Post World War II, again, we were the studs on the block, bottom line, right? We were basically dictating what was going on. So we also said that, okay, the dollar is the world's reserve currency, also known as an anchor currency. That means that any nation in the world, you can buy something with a dollar. The only reason we've been able to carry now almost 32 trillion in debt is because the dollar is the world reserve currency. That's it. That is the only reason.
You're trying to change that.
Oh, yes, they are.
Petrodollar.
Okay. Okay, how's globalizing affect us? Yeah, and we'll actually, let's see, did we talk about that here in a second? Okay, I'm not sure if we do or not. Okay, so there's an acronym out there. It's BRIC, B-R-I-C. Brazil, Russia, India, China. Okay, they're the fastest emerging nations in the world. Okay, and you look at the population, India and China, it's like, holy smokes, that's 3 billion people, pretty much, right? I mean, that's a lot of people. And so you see these guys. Now, we got Russia fighting Ukraine, right? You kind of see what's going on. All of a sudden, we throw sanctions on Russia. Well, the sanctions don't do anything, right? Sanctions are not working like they used to. It's because China and the BRIC, part of the BRIC, are allying with Russia, right? Well, which is part of the BRIC also. But you're starting to see these alliances. I wrote about, and this was a while back, about this unholy alliance between China and Iran. My professor at the time thought I was smoking crack, but it's like, look, these guys, even though ideologically, you got a theology versus, communist type of, whatever you want to call it over there. Historically, they're in it for the long game. They see things very similarly. Okay, now we're starting to see that right now. That was 12 years ago. And we're seeing alliances with Saudi Arabia. We're seeing alliances with the UAE, with the OPEC nations, right? We're starting to see that. We're starting to see that, okay, hey, we're going to trade in yuan, right? Not dollars. So that's why when we sit there and say, okay, Putin, we're going to throw a bunch of sanctions on you. Well, shoot, he's actually gotten rich. Russia's actually gotten richer since they've been in Ukraine. I mean, if you can imagine that. And a lot of it has to do with trading their gas, because they're the largest gas producers in the world, in ruble or yuan or whatever it is, right? Not in a dollar. Anyway, it's kind of a crazy thing here. But the quickest way, I'm telling you, and I hate saying this, but really the quickest way to kill America is to debase the dollar. Because everybody in here, all the billionaires that are running around, they're going to feel it. They're not going to feel as bad as we will. But I'm telling you, this is going to drive inflation through the roof like nothing we've ever seen before in this country. Okay.
2001, 3/4 of the nation's world accepted the dollar as the world's reserve currency. We're now 47% of the nations of the world. We're dropping like a rock. We've lost like 8% in the last year. And it's all based on the petrodollar, but the nations of the world are not recognizing the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And you're 100% right. And the aspect is that when you have the world's reserve currencies, you're able to consume more than you produce.
Right. That's
When you don't, the day of accountability comes to reckoning.
That's right. Awesome.
What's that gonna be?
Yeah, we're gonna be left without a
That's a
chair.
good question.
So if we're 32 trillion in debt and the dollar doesn't mean anything anymore, now what?
Well, it still does. It still does, because even with China, okay, a vast majority of China's GDP is based on their exports, right? They really don't have much. I mean, God gave us an incredible nation. I mean, we have more gas, coal, oil reserves, anywhere in the world, And I mean, it's just an incredible place. But they don't. They don't. I mean, their coal comes, well, it was coming from Powder River. Now most of it's coming from Utah, if you can even get it out of there. And So that's kind of the issue. And Australia's coal is very dirty though compared to ours. I mean, we got the cleanest coal in this country of any place in the world, between Utah and Powder River, hands down. We do. And so you got to wonder why. What's really going on here? Okay. Okay, so America has to be marginalized. We kind of talked about that. So how is this happening? Well, it's happening because of the electorate. We are the electorate, right? Because we are electing those who place the global ideology above Americanism at the federal, state, and local level. I mean, as much as I hate to say this, we have nobody as an electorate, okay, as a body, nobody to blame but ourselves for any of this. Right.
Well, that brings up,
Yes.
that brings up
Oh, yeah.
what are our election, our elections,
Honest elections?
honest?
Well, I tell you what,
They want an honest
well, I don't know if we want to go down this one, but I will tell you that I have been skeptical since the early 2000s. And I've been like, okay, something's going on here. Something is going on here. And it wasn't until recently, in Gillette, when I saw a guy who actually did all the math behind this. And it's
Dr.
like, holy
Frank?
smokes. Say again?
Dr. Frank?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we were talking again in Sheridan, he and I and a couple of the guys, and I said, I knew something was going on. And I think a lot of people did. Okay? But I said, until I saw that, I never realized that our elections are actually federalized and centralized since the mid-90s.
Right.
And they have been.
Since when?
The mid-90s. The mid-90s.
Mid-90s?
That's what it looks like based on all of his
Well, I got
data
an
reduction.
example for you. I worked in California and I saw that in the 70s.
Nationwide or in?
Well, if you were to vote on anything, they wouldn't have
Okay.
they would allow you to vote on a single issue. They always had a writer that was attached, so you were
Oh.
voting for Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde,
At the same time.
you know? I mean, you never could vote for anything honest because they
Yeah.
always had a corrupt writer attached to it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Huh.
why they have all the problems in
Yeah.
Southern
Yeah.
California.
Well, we saw what happened in 2018 out there, where 6 of the 7 red counties flipped blue because of ballot harvesting and exactly what you're talking about in a lot of cases.
Now,
And that's
I
just
wasted
recent.
my time there.
Yeah.
I knew all the candidates. I went
Okay.
to vote. And when they went in there to vote, I even told the election people, I said, this is nothing but a waste of my time. I won't come back.
Yeah. Where were you?
I was in Santa Rosa.
Okay.
I had a landscape business.
They've got a mafia there. Big family.
Well,
Hey, sir, that's a great point. I mean, yeah.
You'd be
Brown.
surprised on
Well-
how many people in California are red.
Well, I was stationed out there, both at Camp Pendleton, down near.
They're all leaving
San Diego.
because they had the right numbers
Yeah.
to undermine Gavin Newsom
Yeah.
way ahead
Yeah.
of what they needed.
Well, when you're able to get people to believe that somebody like Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy, right? It's like, are you kidding me? I mean, he who controls the narrative gets into office, period. And the narrative is substantiated or is promulgated with money, unfortunately.
Well, I just heard recently they've had so many people leave California with this rain and
Yeah.
moisture we've had this year. They say now they can meet 100% of their quota because half of it's gone.
Oh, yeah. Well, the other place, and what was interesting is I lived out in Ridgecrest, okay, in Eastern California. I was testing airplanes out there. And it's north of Edwards. And I tell you, the Sierras, okay, it's kind of like Washington, Oregon, California. You got the spine of the mountains going up there. Coastal and interior, 2 completely different groups of people. I mean, those guys out in Inyo County, all the way up to Susanville, way up north to Shasta. I mean, shoot, those guys on that side, for the most part, were like folks here. Very different. But that's actually a really good point. Jeff, you had something?
Well, I was just going to say the second part of the election was the infiltration of the party. We got these people that come out, they pose as Republicans, and they have a different agenda. And it seems to be our governor-endorsed candidates, because I believe our governor's a globalist and working with globalists. But you look at their donor lists. I mean, all anybody has to do is get online and look at their donor lists, and you can see who's supporting these candidates. And when you've got DC, New York, Pfizer, BNSF Railroad, Pacific Railroad, Black Hills Energy, you got all these people endorsing these candidates, paying for these candidates. I mean, this is how we have to fight back a little bit. We've
That's right.
got to get in and find out who these candidates are that we're voting for. Not only have they infiltrated the candidates, they're in our GOP, and our GOP is working down that path as well. We got a big problem in Wyoming. We seem to be on the defense right now. Globalists are behind the whole thing. There's a special interest in Wyoming that they know what it is, but they're here, and the GOP's on the defense right now. And these guys, they've been on the offense for a long time. And I think the only way to really get back at these people is to shine a light on them, and we got to get our voice out there, and we got to shine a light on these people and show the people who they are. And whatever means that is, we've got to figure it out, because we're behind in this game.
Well, the problem is we respect the Constitution. The blue side eats it and spits it out and makes their own rules. That's the problem right there.
But we have the Constitution.
Yep.
We have the Constitution on our side.
Still.
It doesn't look like it.
But not the judges.
This gentleman's got a very valid point. In Wyoming, traditionally, I've been in Wyoming my whole life, is that if you just traditionally have been Republican people, and if you put an R in front of your name, you're going to usually get elected, regardless of what your viewpoints are. And as a general rule, as Wyomingites, we just kind of trust that somebody's going to be conservative. We haven't really done our own due diligence to figure out who they really are, what their character really is, and what principles they really stand on. Are they constitutional? Are they not constitutional? Maybe they don't even understand the Constitution.
Yeah.
But they know that they can just put the R in front of their name and get elected. And so we have been categorized by many conservative evaluators as the most blue-red state in the 48. And so that's a concern. When you've got these people that run for office as Republican, they don't have any conservative constitutional values. They're socialists by nature. And so, I mean, personally, I know several of them that are that have very little understanding of the Constitution, and that are no more conservative than the blue guys out in New York.
And yet they get voted back in year after year.
Oh, I know
after
they
year
do.
because nobody pays
Hey,
attention.
is there anybody who disagrees with that? And it's okay if you do. Anybody? Have a different? Yes, ma'am.
No, you just asked a question. I don't have anything to say.
Oh, okay. No, fair enough. Okay. No, thanks. It is a matter of due diligence, right? It really is. And I do think, regardless, is if somebody says they're going to do something, you trust that they're going to do that, or at least give it their best effort. You know, and we're not seeing that. You know, we're just not. And there are two different ideologies on how to get in there, and we've seen it play out on both sides of the aisle. I mean, it's very stark. In D.C., it's a uniparty, almost, right? But out here, it's like, well, wait a second here. You know, we do have very principled people out here, and it's like, okay, whether they're Democrats or whether they're Republicans, but you know, that's why debates are so important, right? To where we get them out there, because you know, the average rancher, farmer, whatever, and I did this stuff down in Arlington, McFadden area, and I don't claim to be a rancher by any means, nor do I claim to be a cowboy, even though I've done that in the past, but I mean, 16 hours on the back of a tractor. I mean, how many of those guys, how many of you guys have the time to do the research on these guys? Okay, so when those forums do come up, and it's so important, you know, that I don't care who it is, these two candidates or three candidates, whoever it is, they got to get up there, and there has to be a debate. And I think that should be or some sort of public forum to where we can start drilling these guys, you know, and really vet them out, you know, and expect that, you know, from them, that hey, they start throwing out, you know, what they really believe. But we also know that when you place self-interest above public interest, right, which is really the job of an elected official, is public, you'll say anything to get in there in a lot of cases, right? And I think we're seeing that, right? We are. but then we keep voting them in,
Back in.
right? Sir?
I was gonna say that, a lot of these people in DC have forgotten that they're service of the people.
They're not.
That's right.
And even, interesting things when Biden opens his mouth and he's always saying the wrong thing. He said it would take more than guns to go against the government. Well, with our Constitution, we the people are the government. And the elected officials have forgot that they're there as public servants.
Is this when he decided he was going to threaten
Yeah,
everybody
so
with
anyway,
F-15s and nuclear weapons?
The other thing
Was
was
it
that
F-14,
he
was it?
committed he was a self-proclaimed dictator the first day he entered office. Because he said that about Trump, he said anyone who runs office by executive order is a dictator. And he set the record on that.
Yeah, he did.
Well, you know, one thing that, and I'll say politicians broadly, because it's on, they know that the electorate has short memories. They do. And people do have short memories.
I don't think so.
Well, not in here, probably not a lot of folks in here, but as a general rule, Americans do. The electorate has
Just don't
short
fight
memories.
back like the whining
Well,
other party.
well, that's yeah, no, and I'm
Well,
trying.
then you got the media.
I think that there's been over a dozen of them that I've been watching on Congress meetings with some of these people, congressional hearings, and I think over a dozen people have asked Alexander Mayorkas to resign from the border because he's opening a door that Biden wants him to, and that's why Biden quit building the wall. And so we're inviting all these illegals into our country. Biden is selling land now to China near our military Air Force bases so they can spy. And
We
hack
can stop
the
that. We could stop that here in this
Well,
state.
we can't, but the people in power right now, senators and all those people sitting in government, they have to have a majority vote to knock them out. Okay?
Somebody say no,
But
we couldn't do that.
No,
thing
they
is
said how.
That the people control the government.
Mhm.
And Lincoln even said that if the people become weary of their government, they can exercise their constitutional right to amend it or the revolutionary right to dismember and overthrow it.
Yeah.
So it's the people that have to stand up.
It is, and you know, it's having the will. Okay, it's having the will because none of this is easy. None of this would be easy. I mean, we're getting so far down this road, right, of government dependence and all these things. It's kind of like one of my opponents said, we're just going to kick the federal government out of the state. Okay. Well, how many folks that are residents of Wyoming are working in these federal jobs? Are we just going to kick them out, right? But my point is this. This isn't 40, 50 years ago. We are so far down this road of dependence. I mean, Wyoming, per capita takes more federal handout, whatever you want to call it. I'm looking for the word. More federal subsidies, whatever, per capita than any other state in the nation. You know, it's like, okay, so, but I do like it. In fact, Harriet and I were, and we were talking about, okay, so, hey, this is probably the best way to do this is, okay, let's do this, and we do this in complete agreement. Let's see if we can take a 1 million acre show that we can actually do this, and then we'll do it. But it takes will because the opposition is very determined, and they've got I'm not going to say the high ground, but they've got the power, I guess. Right?
But another thing that they do have, they are the ones that run our universities and our schools and have indoctrinated our children. We've raised ours in Christian home, and we don't know them. 2 of them today.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's when we send them to college.
So whether you're Mao, whether you're Pol Pot, whether you're Stalin, whether you're Hitler, okay, these are all more modern. Every single one of them targets children. Every single one. Because you want to break those children away from their parents.
Yes.
Okay? And the absolute heartbeat of the middle class is the nuclear family. Mom, dad, brother, sister, whatever. I mean, it is. It always has been. And leave it to one generation, one enlightened generation to say, no, that's not really the case. I don't think so.
So what I'm getting at is we have to educate.
Yeah.
And it's more than just taking the high ground. Is the high ground educating? Our neighbors, our
Yeah, I tell you.
That's actually why that's actually why I
You sound like
started
a
these,
domestic terrorist.
Yeah.
is to try to do that.
Okay, hold on. Hey guys, let me just get through this. I think
Yeah.
we'll start getting to some of this toward the end. All right. Let's see. What are we doing?
That is honestly.
Okay, so we already talked about the elections, right? Okay, that's okay. Now we were just talking about this education, right? Or indoctrination, whatever you want to call it. Okay, at all levels, right? Every single one of these narratives that are the predominant narratives right now, right?
Yes,
Climate change, systemic racism, I don't even know what that is. Gender dysphoria, right? I mean, and I'm using kind of what's out there right now. And then COVID, okay, they all have one common thing, right? They are all targeting guilt. Okay? They're all targeting guilt. All of them. Okay? For us to surrender our liberties. They really are, and open our wallets. That's, again, this is my conclusion. Okay, we kind of talked about that. BRIC, everybody understands that, right, with what's going on? Okay. Venezuela's another one. Okay, big oil producer. We're starting to see, China, some of these BRIC nations ally with them. So this is something we were kind of talking about. Okay, what about water and food security?
we don't have anything.
Who owns this river out here?
EPA.
Well, in our Constitution, it says that we own all the waters inside, but that's not really the case, right?
Waters of the United States.
Right, WOTUS. So there's and WOTUS has been around for a little while. Okay, it's waters of the U.S. I'm not a water expert. Okay, I do know a couple people who are far better than I am. The center for the centroid for WOTUS was navigable waters, right? Well, this new rule in this current administration that they said is basically it could be interpreted. These are low areas that could fill up with water, okay, just temporarily. Okay, so a rancher or farmer sitting out there going to plow that, next thing you know, he's fined. Hey, you can't touch that. So it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. It's like anything primarily with, we were kind of talking about DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, okay? Same thing with EPA. With the Biden 3030, what is it? What really is it? It's so ambiguous right now. All we know is that by 3030, or 2030 rather, well, I'll be dead by 3030. By 2030, that the Fed will own 30% of the land in America.
30% additional.
30% additional, yeah. So and everybody's heard the adage in 1891 became half a state. Right? So I mean, holy smokes! So 30% additional to that. That's a lot.
Bill Gates are well on their way.
Well, they are, and this is kind of gosh, are we there yet? Let me see. Yeah, I guess we kind of are. Let me see. Let's see. Hold on. Oop, I went backward there. Something's happening here. Okay. I guess we can talk about it here. Everybody know what CRP is? Conservation Reserve Program. Okay. I know the landowners or whatever, ranchers, farmers. I'm sure familiar with it. Okay, so this was started back during the Reagan administration. Okay, well, back during the Reagan administration, the first term, shoot, that's when we were producing everything.
Yes.
Right? I mean, we were feeding everybody. Said, okay, hey, hold on, we're wasting all this stuff. Let's see if we can put some of this in some sort of reserve program. So that's what they did. So when I was out running around the state, there were quite a few landowners that came up to me and said, can you get me on a CRP? Man, that's unfortunately, that's a contract you have, with the Fed. So I talked to a couple other folks that you're familiar with, our treasurer, and I said, is it even possible to buy these guys out or whatever, And again, but it's one of those things. Do we really want state government involved in something like that? I mean, it's a decision that was made by that landowner. Probably the best intentions at the time. You're spending 16 hours a day on a tractor. You're not getting paid much, and then all of a sudden, some bright shiny object comes along. Hey, you put those 10 sections in reserve or whatever, and we're going to pay you this amount of money. Okay. So I totally understand. I totally get it. Okay, but right now we're not feeding the world like we used to. Okay, we're not.
Can't even get our own food.
There's a lot of truth to that. Okay, so you know, so there is a big effort. And then we see all these food plants, right? And I don't know, you know, I'm waiting on the investigations back. You know, we just had the one down in Texas, the dairy farm. You guys familiar? 18,000 dairy cows. So it's like, okay, what's really going on here? So we need, I kind of broke it down. Okay, the absolute basic life support. Water, food, clothing, and shelter. I mean, we need that to survive. Okay, then life sustainment. Well, we need self-protection / self-preservation, some way to do that. Energy, okay, we need that, for sure. Some sort of bartering ability. Okay, whether it's a currency or whatever it is. And then basic life propriety, our ethical code. Okay, well, in this case, it's our Constitution, right? Well, that's true. And our Constitution is very much based off of that. Human interaction, you know, that's just kind of one of those things. Law enforcement, mobility, healthcare, in no particular order, but we you know, that's kind of what we need. So there's different graduations of these things. So as we look at really what's going on globally, you know, we look at the top, and that's where the target is. Because if you control that, and then of course healthcare, because that's such a big deal. But if you control the water source, because you need water for everything, right? Then you control the food source by default. Okay, and then one reason why, and again, I think, you know, you guys know that I'm on the right side of the equation here. The ACA, okay, Obamacare, okay, when it came out. One reason why I didn't touch that stack, because there was nothing in there about tort reform or any reform, you know, across the nation. Okay. But he also had a supermajority in Congress get anything through, right? And this is when Pelosi said, "Okay, well, we gotta sign it or pass it to know what's in it." Everybody remember that? Okay. All right. But that's 6%. Okay, I mean that's a significant amount of the economy. Okay, is healthcare. If you control people's health care, you know, in this country, you basically control them. Well, if you control water, food, it's the same thing globally, right? So it's kind of one of those things to where we have to be aware. Okay, regardless of what side you stand on, in the end, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, there is a certain amount of freedom, liberty that you expect, right? And really, it comes down to who can make the best decisions for you personally. The government or you? You know? I mean, I think that's a fair question to ask anybody. I mean, who
We
can?
just have to get rid of the government.
All right. Okay. So what should we do? Okay, I will tell you this. First and foremost, man, be proud to be an American. Okay, be proud to be an American. This country's gone through some tough times. I got it. Okay, but there is no nation in the world, okay, in the history of the world that has done more, okay, for the world when it comes down to promotion of freedom and those kind of things than this nation. Not even close. Okay, even per capita, not even close in this country. Just believing in American exceptionalism, the American spirit, okay? Because I tell you what, once we've lost our spirit, once somebody's lost their spirit, they can be whipped. Right?
Yes.
That's why we can't. Stay informed. We've already kind of talked about this. Politics is dirty. Okay, it is. Global events are boring. But being familiar, at least generally, with what's going on is important. Okay, because what happens in the global arena affects us here, no matter if we're living in Thermopolis, Wyoming. It just does. And you know, if you find stuff out, you know, and that's the thing is as adults, as mature adults, whether we're liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, whatever crap we are, we should be able to sit down and say, okay, so what's going on? Without, you know, beating the hell out of each other, right?
Without being censored.
Well, that's true. That's true. That's true. That's true. That's very true. Yeah. But talk about this stuff because, you know, a lot of times there's a, you know, whatever they're calling it, misinformation or disinformation on it. Guard against false narratives. So if you hear something, make sure you look it up. Okay, get a couple of different, okay, is this really what this is about? Okay, double check. And vote. Vote.
Don't give up.
Okay, don't, and we cannot give up on this stuff. Don't, go ahead.
Can I add?
Sure.
Promote hand-counted ballots in the county that you live in. Promote hand-counted ballots.
You have a county commissioner sitting next to you.
You know, you have your don't compromise your core principles, but I question if everyone has actually evaluated and identified their core principles.
That's
because
fair.
I see a lot of people who jump on the bandwagon of a topic like gender dysphoria, and when you start trying to nail them down on what is their core belief system, I don't care. Okay, so we're talking about gender dysphoria, but do we care about parents' rights?
Yeah.
Do we care about children's mental health? Do we care about, you know, so I think that we're missing that
We are.
piece as
I
a
think so.
whole.
That's actually a really good point. The
Having core
principles.
principles.
Okay, so really what's behind this, okay, there is absolute truth, whether we believe it or not. Okay, there is absolutes. Okay, in our divine providence, right? Via the Bible, it's all based on that. Those are absolutes. And what I believe is that God defines them, period. Okay, there is absolute truth. Okay, and if our principles are based on that, mine are. Now, I screw up just as much as the next guy. But bottom line is there's certain things I will not compromise on, period. I just won't do it, you know? And I don't care what people think of me because of it. Because I would much rather be, in a lot of these cases, respected because of what I believe than liked because I caved.
That's because you got integrity.
I like what
Research.
Wyatt Earp said best, kill them all, let God sort them out.
No, it was, oh shoot.
That was,
Patton, wasn't it?
No, it was,
there was a movie that guy said
It
that.
wasn't Patton, it was,
No, it wasn't Doc Hall.
yeah, I can't remember. It was one of the war. I can't remember what we were doing, but it was. Shoot, I can't remember who said it, but it was. You pull the trigger, God will decide where the bullet lands. So anyway. Okay, but we already talked about this. Research the candidates and know where they stand on key issues. Okay, you got to know.
That's
Right.
hard to know
Yeah.
when there's, never mind. What we have for reporting
Yeah.
and independent thinking in this
Yeah.
community,
You know, if one thing were to change in our public school system, now there's a lot of things that I completely disagree with. We were talking about some of this stuff earlier. If they were to bring back, no kidding, critical thinking and teach critical thinking, okay, regardless of the other crap that's out there, critical thinking, you take both sides of an argument and make an objective
they're not
decision.
going to do it.
No, I know.
So why don't, here's a better one. Why doesn't everybody jerk their kids out of school and let them feel the pain like
There you go.
Budweiser?
Homeschool. What good
Good
is your
idea.
house?
Why don't we take their property tax away? Yeah.
All right, guys, I tell you, I really appreciate it. So I'm, unless you guys want to continue the discussion, I'm basically done. But I will tell you, I asked this to a lot of folks out there, is what really matters if we're not free? Okay, what matters? And, and that's something that we ask ourselves. I ask myself all the time. What really matters if we're not free? Because that's what it's all about. It really is.
When you had that up there about the indoctrination, it reminded me, my husband and I have a couple of friends who are, the men are from Germany, the wives are one from the US, one's from another country, but they've lived in China for almost 15 years working and running a manufacturing company. And one couple just moved back to the United States. The other one is going to be moving to Germany because the Chinese government has made it known that within the next 2 years, well, this happened 6 months ago, so in the next 18 months, there will be no non-Chinese in their country, period. And there will be no Chinese who have ever left the country to seek asylum somewhere else or who have shown allegiance of any kind to another country. So they have to be Chinese and they have to be loyal Chinese or they will not, they are closing their borders. So when you look at that list of indoctrination and you ask yourself the question, well, why would they do that? They have an agenda. They have an intention of what they plan to do. I have my beliefs about what I think that is, but I don't think it's, it's not a big leap to figure that out.
Yeah.
When you look at the power they have, the control they have, the money they have, and the alliances that they have, when they have a
What do you
foreign
think they're gonna
agent in our White House working for them, and many of our elected representatives working for them, it's pretty obvious what our responsibility has to be.
Boy, I tell you, it is. And, they're having, direct interaction with Chinese folks when I was out in the far West Pacific. They teach Chinese exceptionalism in their school. Okay, but it's a lot different than ours, than the way we used to teach American. I think a lot of folks in here went to grammar school, grade school, whatever. We probably kind of taught American exceptionalism. They don't teach that anymore, right? But they do over there, okay? And it's interesting how, and again, we've kind of done this to ourselves. Let's take the Philippines real quickly. So we show up to the Philippines. Okay, Duterte, is the president over there. We show up to the Philippines. How does America show up to the Philippines? With an aircraft carrier. Yeah, right. That's how we show up to the Philippines. How does China show up to the Philippines? A new mall, right? Healthcare. That's how they, and it's just amazing. So you have, in fact, there was this guy. We got to know each other. He was the head of their Philippine, I guess, SEAL equivalent guys. Okay, and so we had some very interesting conversations about this and what he's seeing over there. And of course, and there's so many things that are mirroring this new generation of Filipinos, kind of the millennial type generation, right? They're so similar to ours. They see that quick thing, right? Oh shoot, man, there's a new mall, right? Well, then they go down here and they see this, USS, America sitting there, or some nuclear sub sitting there, and shoot, they don't care about that kind of stuff, and that's the way China's been doing it, all over the world, but they really prey on maybe fledgling economies, or maybe those that aren't doing that well, and they kind of give them all these favors. And what typically happens is that country doesn't realize what the payback is. And that's one thing where Duterte, when they were doing all this stuff, he said, well, screw you guys. Well, that didn't go over too well with the PRC, right? People's Republic of China, or the Chinese Communist Party, running it over there. And but yeah, it's one of those things. You're absolutely right. I mean, we've seen what happened with Hong Kong. Hong Kong was not supposed to go under a communist leader, but it is. It's going quick. It really is. And it's too bad. It's kind of interesting the way that is, because you've got basically some mix between some pseudo-capitalism going on because of Hong Kong and what it is, a huge economic place, and then the governance of the people who live there. It's a little bit, it's kind of, I would not want to live there anymore. Or really visit. Somebody had a question, I think. Oh, yeah. Right.
So, China is basically a fake superpower that pretends to be a superpower based on our economy and our imports, and without the American economy, their economy would crash pretty quick also. So do you think with this BRIC and all of that, do you think they're trying to kind of mitigate that with these other allies? Because even Russia and India can't really survive on their own without...
They can't. And that's why, we're talking about debasing the dollar, right? That's kind of... Okay. The dollar is still a much safer bet than the yuan. Okay. Much safer than the ruble. Okay. Much safer than a lot of these currencies out there. It still is. Okay, but I'm telling you, that's not going to last forever if we keep going down this road. Okay, particularly when you said, 47% now of the countries out there. That's actually a good number. I hadn't heard that, but it's a good number. Yeah, it comes down to our national policy. So Obama looked at China as a competitor, right? National policy. Trump rolls in there and says, BS, they're an opponent. Well, that's a completely different way to look at them. Yeah. Just that one change in word, right? Well, they are. And it's amazing how national policy. So here's and I know you guys probably want to get out of here pretty soon. But so I'm on Guam, all right, and I'm over there, and this is 2018, late 2018, 2019, somewhere there. And No Ko Un up in North Korea is running his mouth about bombing the Marianas, right? Nuking the Mariana Islands. Guam. So I've got quite a few Marines, a whole bunch of sailors, CVs, and government contractors and those guys working for me, right? So one of the guys comes in and says, "Hey, sir, we're kind of worried about, what's going on here." I'm like, "Are you kidding?" So anyway, I said, "Okay, all right." So I said, "Okay, get everybody in there, and let's talk about this real quick." So I got everybody in. So we're standing room only in this for this meeting, and I said, "Okay, who is concerned that No Ko Un, Kim Jong Un, is going to nuke Guam?" And okay, guys had valid concerns. I wasn't going to mock it. Okay, guys had valid concerns. I said, "Okay." Now that archipelago is 15 islands, right? If an individual is born on any of those 15 islands, they are an American citizen. They're an American citizen. But nobody in here can own land on the northern 14, only on Guam. Okay, unless you're Chamorro or Carolinian descent, direct descent. But that's a different story. So everything's leased land. So anyway, I said, "Okay, let's get everybody together." I said, "All right, guys, here's the deal." As I said, for well over 20 years, I've done a lot of conventional munitions weaponeering. Okay, and this stuff, these explosions, whatever, happen in milliseconds, right? I mean, that's pretty quick. Milliseconds, right? So, it pops and, And I said, I had the opportunity to do a little bit of this nuke stuff, which is really kind of interesting because Marines never get this opportunity, but I did. And I said, "Guys, this happens a lot faster than that." And I said, "So it's going to happen so fast, you won't even feel it, so don't worry about it, if it were to happen." But no, the whole point guys were laughing, but the whole point is that we had somebody at the White House that time, okay, that had they even considered it, flinched, whatever, that doggone country would have been wiped off the face of the map. Because that's the one thing, whether you like him or not, Donald Trump is very unpredictable. And it kept the rest of the world in check. Right. Whether you like the guy, okay, all these nations that didn't like him or didn't whatever, they at least respected him. Okay. So, and that was kind of the deal. But anyway, it was an interesting conversation. All right.
Anybody have any other questions?
I got one question. I might be kind of a pessimist, but our country is so divided. Do you ever see any common ground? I mean, when you can't even, how do you talk to somebody that can't even tell you what a woman is? I mean, really, we're so divided. I just don't see no common ground.
Well, and I think the other part of that is, how can you believe somebody like that, right? Isn't it odd? I think there's such a fear. We were kind of talking about that. Stand for your principles. I mean, God doesn't make mistakes.
No, He doesn't.
So it's like, the gender on your birth certificate is going to match the gender on your death certificate. That's just the way it is. I mean, biologically. I mean, but I think it's one of those things that you can really see where we are nationally. But if you look at it holistically, there's a lot of chaff out there, right? The WEF, they don't even talk about this stuff. Okay, it's climate change. Everything is focused on climate change. But in the end, it's really not even that. It's not ESG, it's not climate change. It is wealth redistribution from us. That's really what it is. Okay, so we have to be aware of that stuff.
George Bush Sr., he was one of the guys that started all this junk. His grandfather came from Nazi Germany, and he was a Nazi. He brought a bunch of money over here and started this whole thing about one rule nation or whatever.
Well, and we've heard it, the one world government. We've heard New World Order. We've heard the Great Reset. Remember when Hillary's up there as Secretary of State with her counterpart in Russia, and they pressed the big red button as the reset? It was far more than that little prop, though. There's a lot more to it, But what I ask you guys is again, as nasty as it is, okay, as cumbersome and boring or uninteresting as it may be, and again, whatever side you're on, is take an active interest. It's our responsibility as Americans,
Yes, it is.
okay, to take an active interest in our government. It
See,
really
but
is.
that's just it, whichever side you're on. Now, if,
Well,
praise God, if we can get Trump re-elected again, we're all gonna be happy. But there's gonna be half the country that's just gonna be, I mean, there's just no common ground. I mean, there's just gonna be a
Yeah.
fight on that side. They're gonna be protesting and rioting and burning down buildings.
Yeah.
And unless we institute martial law or something,
well,
how do we control it?
it starts here, it starts at the precinct level.
Yeah.
It starts with the commissioners, it starts with the counties, it starts with our,
It starts with these kinds of things.
it does, it starts here. Because
Bring people with you next time.
Yeah.
If you want to be informed, I mean,
we've all heard top down, right? This has gotta be bottom up. That's the only way to
Yeah,
change
but
it.
how do you do it when even the local government's corrupt?
Run for office. Run for office.
And have integrity.
Researchers in office.
Get
she's a
involved.
legislator, we
Get
got
involved.
two
Yeah, I didn't want to be a
legislators.
county commissioner.
First of all, I
I
want
am
to thank
one.
Brent for,
Maybe
this
I'll
was
be one
amazing.
next year.
Thank you for doing this. Appreciate it.
All right.
These are hard topics, but I think there is common ground in almost every single thing. You just have to find it.
Well,
And
it
if you
can be, yeah.
and the only way you're going to find it is to start talking.
Well, I think we focus on the fringe,
We do.
and I don't think the majority of people are on the fringe.
Well, Brent
They're
has
just the loudest.
had on one of his slides the narratives. The false narratives. You know, if first it's BLM, now it's trannies, and I mean it just goes on and on and on. All these things to divide us. Why
I mean,
are you
if
trying to
you
divide
just
us?
look at social media and TV news and stuff, you would think that there are drag queens reading to every kid in every school. And that's not true. That's not true.
Well, it is if they keep saying it because
Right.
it becomes a social
But
norm.
we have to know the truth at our core and not buy into those not be distracted by that.
Well, it made its way to Lander.
Yeah.
Transgender, the drag shows in the park, they took over, they had a drag queen show in our library. So it's
Reading
coming
to the children.
to Wyoming.
No, I know, but I'm just
Globalism
saying
is
it's
very
not
alive and
everywhere.
well in our state. There's a lawsuit in Rock Springs right now where
Right.
the student was transformed and the school helped
Without the parents' note.
that girl do it, and her parents was not aware. These are things that are happening in our state, and we need to attend these council meetings. We need to go after these people. We need to shine a light on them.
Hey,
You know, we had a law, if I could,
Every
yeah.
community.
but
Yeah.
don't
Community
believe
take
you're
care of their own
defeated.
community, and other communities will help those communities. Once we start this ball rolling.
So can I, actually what you're saying is spot on. You know, I am a believer, okay, that poor or bad legislation is far worse than any legislation, far worse than no legislation, right? So, you know, I sat in our representative's house, we were sitting there talking one time. Okay, in 2017 they passed a law, right? The Parental Protection Act or whatever it is, or whatever it was, I can't remember. So I read through the whole thing and I said, Mark, I said, this is great, but there's no teeth. So what happens if this gets violated? This is 2007. Now, this was just recently where we sat down, well, a year ago, whatever. But I said, there's no teeth to this law. Well, the plan is to amend it and put teeth in it. Well, that hasn't happened. So, you know, and that's kind of the whole thing with recourse on, and you're spot on. I mean, you know, it's like, well,
I've never
how can,
protested anything in my life, but we made signs at my store. We heard that they were going to be doing that drag show in that park next to an ice cream shop during happy hour for kids, and we all showed up down there with our signs. We called them pedophiles. We called them out for who they were. And you just got to go after these people. You know.
And the superintendent in Rock Springs.
It is.
Once they start, they just start spreading.
You think it can't happen here, and it's happening here.
Yeah, it is.
There's
I
the
don't think
people that are
anybody
leading
thinks it
that
can't
have an art center downtown Lander. They've already put some desks in there, and they're advertising art school. They're trying to get your children in there, and they're going to indoctrinate them. You know, sure as hell. You know?
Down in California, the teachers say, hey, whatever you want to be.
I know.
Parents don't even know about it.
Right,
You
that's
know?
why everybody needs to get together if you can on May 8th and go to Rock Springs and go to that city council meeting.
There's a child in Sheridan, we just learned about that, it has had actual surgery.
Really?
Yeah.
So they say it's not happening in Wyoming, it's not happening, it sure is happening in Wyoming.
So what's
Problem
happening,
is the
May
schools
8th?
have too much power.
May
Yeah,
8th
yeah,
in Rock Springs.
And we've got a
City Council
governor that
meeting
allows
for
it.
the
He's
Wilshire.
for it. You know, and all the governor endorsed candidates